Welcome to the weekly GraphQL community meeting. This week, let's look at the board. We had Zenhub board. We did have, let's start with the fixes or additions that were merged this week since our last meeting. And it sounds like we had one or two merged, and I'll let Alex speak to those.
Hey, yeah, we got one issue merged. It was actually fixed by core team and merged. It was about inability to get products for all products for Anchor categories. So let's say if you have category which is marked as Anchor and it has subcategories which contain products, before the fix, those products were not visible when you query Anchor category. And this is not how it currently behaves on storefront, and obviously had to be fixed. So right now, if you have hierarchy of categories under Anchor and you query all products from Anchor category, you will get basically all those products. And there were two issues reported independently. So this is one of them, which is Misha shown right now on the screen. And there was another one. It should be somewhere linked.
Is it this one or the previous one?
So this one was marked as duplicate, but I mean, those were reported almost at the same time. There is issue 89, which is another one. Yep.
That's the one. Okay.
Yep. And also right now we have 3 pull requests from community members in progress. We are working on finalizing them and getting ready to merge. So basically, for now, we are waiting for some changes to be made in those pull requests. And as soon as there any comments, any outstanding comments are addressed, we'll be glad to merge those pull requests.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for doing that. Okay, and the next thing that I was going to make a mention of is that we did not receive any new issues in the past week, so let's take that as a good sign, because most of the issues that have been getting reported have been bugs, so maybe we ran out of those. So the next thing that I wanted to do during this week is go through some of the issues that we've got in our backlog in the column called for grooming. And just quickly talk through a few of them in an effort to kind of move them to ready to start column. So the group of items that I think we should go through today came from our CMS content team, and we've got a few of them written down here. You can see there's several stories for additional coverage that has to do with GraphQL API, additional coverage for CMS related entities like CMS page, CMS block. This one is an Epic, I think. So let's look through a couple of these. CMS page coverage has to do with, like I said, building out the GraphQL API so that you can query and manage CMS pages, CMS page entities. So as a Magento developer, I'd like to query CMS page content using GraphQL API so that I can build basic e-commerce storefronts using only GraphQL, right? So the main use case here is a developer querying or using GraphQL to query CMS page content and getting back all the necessary data that they need to render the pages on the storefront or in third-party apps. The way that it's written currently is for only querying this data, but there's nothing to prevent us from being able to manipulate and manage it as well. So do things like creating and updates and deletes as well. In acceptance criteria, what we've got so far is that obviously only pages that are enabled currently should be returned by the API. If a page is disabled, it shouldn't be visible on storefront. So there's that distinction. Then store view context is passed just like it's built to today. So today we already have support for context, passing context like this in HTTP headers. So obviously only pages that are relevant in a given context should be returned if you request a page that doesn't exist in the current context, it should not be returned. Staging versions of the page cannot be queried. This has to do with the staging and preview functionality. Obviously, only content that's currently live can be returned by the GraphQL API, because that's all the storefront has the ability to view and render, right? And next, what I have is a list of fields. This again is kind of a draft that needs to be validated with a couple more teams. But as far as the CMS page entity in the system today, it's got several of these fields that we think should be returned. So URL or URL key, layout parameter. A couple of these are with question marks. So layout, update, XML, and theme. Then we have page title, content, heading, and then rendered or unrendered page content. Currently, so the difference is that if it's rendered, it will not contain any Magento specific directives or kind of variables in the content. And if it's an unrendered, then it potentially could, right? And currently there's one or two configurations in Magento settings that kind of dictates how that works with, for example, images in content. And so we will want to build that out with the upcoming page builder features, for example. And we're already in conversations on how to manage those. Okay, and then in addition to those fields, we've got meta title, meta keywords, and meta description fields that should be returned, as well as parent pages, because all pages can live in a hierarchy. So that relationship should be potentially returned as well. And we've got a note there that it should be covered with API functional tests. And we've got an example there. I think now that this is covered, what I'm going to do is probably take off this for grooming label and move it into our ready column. So I'm going to close this guy and move it in here. And then I want to talk through the second related feature here, which is very similar, except so it's still a CMS entity, but now this time instead of it being a CMS page, it's a CMS block, which reads, as a Magento developer, I want to query CMS block content using GraphQL API so that I can build basic e-commerce storefronts using only GraphQL for efficiency. So again, same type of deal here. It's written for querying, and this is where I think we'll start with this entity. But later on, we'll definitely want to build out capabilities to manage them in terms of creating, updating, and deleting as well. The use case is very similar. A developer can query GraphQL for CMS blocks, right, and get back all they need to render those blocks on the storefront or third-party apps. So very kind of analogous to the previous story. Only enabled blocks should be returned by the API. The store view context should be respected in terms of what's returned versus not. Staging versions cannot be queried. Again, only the live data would be returned by the API. And then as far as the object itself or the fields that it has on it, it's kind of a simpler object than a page is, and it has much fewer field elements. But things that should be returned are title, identifier, and then again, rendered or unrendered block context, depending on what configuration is in place. And we've got an example of Web API functional test there at the bottom. Any questions or anything to add on these guys?
So I have a question to the previous one. There is a theme field. Why is it on the CMS page entity?
Which field?
Theme.
Yeah, it's got a question mark. So it's just a field that I saw that currently exists on the in the admin panel on the CMS page editor. So it was unclear to me personally. This needs to be like validated with the CMS team. So if they don't think that it needs to be returned on storefront, then it won't be.
Okay.
Unless you're sure, should I just take it off? If you're sure that it doesn't need to be returned, I can take it off.
No, probably it's better to talk to them.
Okay. Yeah, I'll ask them to validate this. Okay, so the previous one, I'm also going to take off the grooming label for now and move it into our ready column. So both of these, by the way, should be compatible with kind of the old or older legacy now CMS system and the newer page builder kind of entities and concepts. So we need to take into account both of those. Okay, this CMS coverage here is an epic, so that's more of a container story for everything else. I don't think I made another one for other CMS entities, unless I just don't see it here. But that's all I was kind of planning on going through today. We are now up to almost 20 stories and or bugs, call them work items, that are in the ready to start column. So these should be able to be picked up and worked on by anyone who volunteers. And then we've got 50 issues that still need to be groomed out. So we'll gradually go through these and move them into ready to start as we kind of talk through them and add details to these stories and bugs. I guess some of these are epics as well, so the actual number is lower. Okay, does anyone have anything to add or bring up on this call? Alrighty, we will end with this. Next week, it's unclear. We may be skipping next week's meeting because we have people out of town, but we will let you know in the Slack channel. So come join us there and we will let you know. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you guys in 1 week or 2 weeks.
Thanks.